We're going to take a look at some interventions for your ADHD teen, and this is just going to be kind of an overview or a summary. In the ebook, we're going to look at some very specific, detailed parenting strategies to use with ADHD teens. One characteristic of ADHD teens is they do seek a lot of independence and freedom, more so than the average teenager, and that's fine. We want to encourage that independence. We want to give them the benefit of the doubt and trust them up front until they violate that trust. But we also want to be very careful about the activities that they engage in and the friends that they hang with. Consider compromise when possible. Set up as many win-win situations as you can and try to offer many attractive alternatives. For example, son says, hey, I want to go to McDonald's for dinner. Mom says, no, but we'll cook some burgers on the grill. That's a good alternative. ADHD kids, as you know, tend to be in conflict with authority figures quite frequently. They tend to disobey at home quite frequently. That's an understatement, right? So we as parents need to state the rules very clearly. We want to involve the kid in the development of the rules. And we want to write these rules down and we want to post them. Put them on the refrigerator door, on the bathroom mirror. ADHD teens act younger than they are. You may have a son who's 16 years old chronologically, but a little more like 9 or 10 years old emotionally. So we as parents do have to kind of adjust our expectations. When you have a problem with his behavior, enlist his help in finding a solution to the problem. We as parents of ADHD kids want to teach the desired behavior, and we do that with discipline, not punishment. Punishment is when the parent is angry with the kid and just wants revenge. Discipline, however, is when we impose a consequence in order to teach the child the right way to do things. ADHD kids are very impulsive, so we have to anticipate problems. If you're going on a lengthy vacation, you need to plan for that. If you're going to an expensive restaurant with the family, you need to plan for that. Also, avoid tempting the teenager. For example, if your husband is a hunter, you want to make sure he keeps his rifles in a locked cabinet. If you're a smoker or a drinker, you want to make sure that you keep tobacco and alcohol out of his way. If you are on prescription medicine, you want to keep that hid somewhere. If you have a child who could drive a car, even though he may not necessarily have his driver's license yet, you want to make sure you keep those keys out of his way. And in worst case scenarios where his impulsivity is getting him into a lot of trouble, you may want to consider medication or an adjustment in his medication. ADHD kids have difficulty paying attention and they don't seem to listen. So we have to make eye contact when we want to make a point. We can use touch. Also, we want to keep the instructions very brief, short and sweet. If the instruction goes on for more than 5 or 10 seconds, the ADHD kid will not be able to retain it. We want to avoid preaching, lecturing, arguing, threatening, getting angry, and so forth. I've had parents say, well, you know, I've tried to get him to listen, and I've told him, and I've told him, and I've told him, and it goes in one ear and out the other. Well, to be honest with you, it doesn't even go in the one ear with an ADHD kid. We have to write instructions down, and we have to accept the fact that they're going to look distracted when we're talking to them. And just because they look distracted doesn't necessarily mean that they're ignoring us. ADHD kids are very forgetful. They don't do their chores. So again, we have to make a written list, and we want to post that list where they can see it frequently. If they're having trouble with the chore, we can help them get started. If they're not sure how to do it, we can show them how to do it. They can come to us and ask for help while they're doing the chore if they need help. As you may know, if you have an ADHD kid, they're very disorganized. They lose things. They have a messy room. So we need to put their name on their possessions, put their name on their tote bag, on their school bag, on their books. If you have had a son who's lost his cell phone and lost his iPod, you may want to consider purchasing less expensive things. Help him develop organizational skills. We as parents of ADHD kids have to play the role of coach. You may want to list steps in doing chores. For example, cleaning the room, the list might look like this. Step number 1, pick up loose items off the floor. Step number 2, vacuum the floor. Step number 3, pick up loose items off of dresser tops. Step number 4, get the rag and furniture polish from the cabinet and dust dresser tops. Now I know this seems like a lot of extra work to go through, but keep in mind that the ADHD kid has to have very specific, concrete, detailed instructions in order for them to have a snowball's chance in Hades of following through. ADHD kids lack awareness of time and they're late quite frequently, so we can get them a wristwatch alarm. At least that attaches to their body, they'll be less likely to lose it. Also, you can get them a cell phone. If you do, get the belt clip so it attaches to their belt. They'll be less likely to lose that. And just teach awareness of time in general. Because, as I'm sure you know, if you have an ADHD kid, they do have difficulty planning ahead. So we want to play coach and teach planning and teach time management. ADHD kids are very difficult to discipline, so we want to use positive reinforcement. And what I mean by this is catch them in the act of doing things right, or catch them in the act of not doing something wrong, and reward that. Not with money or with material things, but with your acknowledgement and praise. Use logical consequences. In other words, try to make the discipline fit the crime as much as possible. For example, if your kid damages property, like say he punches a hole in the wall or something, it would make sense for him to help with the repair and also pay for the damage. We want to issue a consequence immediately for misbehavior, and we want to reward immediately for good behavior. Be consistent. Make sure that good behavior always gets a reward and that negative behavior always gets a consequence. Be creative and try to come up with new rewards and new consequences periodically. And also use behavioral charts as needed. ADHD kids have low frustration tolerance and they can be very irritable from time to time. So when they are irritable and when they're emotional, that's going to be a good time for you to muster up some empathy, some active listening skills, and to both teach and model anger control. And we look at some very specific strategies to do this in the ebook. ADHD kids argue, and you get a lot of backtalk from them. We have to pick our battles very carefully with ADHD kids. Some things you may just want to ignore. Some things you may just want to walk away from. Other times you may want to assert yourself and issue a consequence. If you and your child are upset at the time, you may want to let an hour go by before you come back and talk to him about the consequence. ADHD kids tend not to want to take responsibility for their misbehavior. So again, we need to hold them accountable each and every time. Be consistent with both rewards and consequence. ADHD kids tend to be deceptive and can be dishonest. So if you know the answer, don't ask. Use discipline rather than punishment. Again, punishment is when the parent is angry and wants revenge. Discipline is imposing the consequence so that the child will learn the right things to do. ADHD kids can be very restless and they're easily bored. Their two emotions are mad and bored. So we as parents want to get them involved in activities and sports, especially sports where, such as football, soccer, those types of activities where they burn up a lot of energy. Also, we can plan interesting family outings. We can encourage our ADHD kid to cultivate interests and hobbies and just a variety of interesting, energy-burning activities. ADHD kids tend to want the parent to buy them stuff all the time. So one of the things that we can do is provide them with opportunities to earn money, then they can buy their own things. Because as you'll read about in the ebook, self-reliance is key. We want to plan for holidays or birthdays. For example, you want to let your ADHD kid know up front that you're only spending $50 for his birthday, or you're not going to go over a $70 limit for Christmas presents for each child. Set some type of limit, some type of boundary up front. Because ADHD kids tend to lose their things and break their things, you will want to purchase fewer things, and the things that you do purchase, you want to make sure they're the less expensive items. ADHD kids tend to break things and have a lot of accidents, and we as parents can sometimes take that personally. In other words, oftentimes we as parents assume that they did that intentionally. I would say a good 95% of the time, the ADHD kid does not break things on purpose, does not have accidents on purpose. We need to keep that in mind. Now, if it's obvious to you that he broke something on purpose, that's a totally different story. When he does have an accident, treat him the same way you would an adult. You may want to discuss with him his physical strength, because ADHD kids do have a lot of energy and they're very hyper and they are kind of bouncing around. And also, you may just want to just put the expensive items away. ADHD kids can be very daring, and it's not uncommon for them to break bones. So as parents, we want to encourage safe but yet stimulating activities. We want to monitor the level of danger. We have to provide added monitoring and supervision that we wouldn't have to with a less intense, out of control child. ADHD kids have difficulty getting to sleep, so we want to establish a reasonable bedtime. We want to give them a heads up, maybe a 10 or 15, even a 30-minute heads up that it's time to get ready for bed. We want to establish a bedtime routine, and we don't want them to start projects, when it's 15 minutes before they're to head to the bedroom. Oh, they have difficulty waking up, so one of the things we can do is buy them a very loud alarm clock. We can also connect lights and TV to the timer so that at a specific time everything in his room comes on. Try positive incentives. For example, if I only have to ask you twice to get up this morning, you have an extra half hour of playtime after school, or something to that effect. Consider medication only as a last resort, and look for other causes. For example, maybe his room's too hot or too cold. Maybe he had too much sugar and candy that day. Maybe he had a liter of Mountain Dew before he went to bed. So we have to look for other causes of his sleep problems. So because they have difficulty getting to sleep, they also have difficulty getting up and getting with the morning routine. So we have to allow enough time. In other words, if they have to be out the door at 8:30, we probably need to get them up at 7. If we have problems with their morning routine, enlist their help in solving the problem. And we also want to use logical consequences. For example, if it's time to leave and you take him to school and he's not dressed yet, then he has to get dressed in the car. Or if he's of driving age and he drives himself to school, but he gets there late, then he loses driving privileges later that day, or maybe for 2 or 3 days. And, one of the things we can do is just get things ready the night before. If he's on medication, you want to be sure to give that to him immediately when he gets up. Birds of a feather flock together. In other words, your strong-willed, intense, and sometimes out-of-control teenager is going to want to hang with other strong-willed, intense ADHD teenagers. So there's nothing wrong with that in and of itself, but we as parents also want to encourage other relationships. ADHD kids are attention seekers, so we do want to give them some opportunities to be the center stage. We do want to encourage them to participate in activities where they get recognized. But at the same time, we want to discuss inappropriate attention, and there's some things that we just need to ignore. Again, with the ADHD kid, we really have to pick our battles very carefully. ADHD kids are very intrusive, so we have to set boundaries. We have to impose consequences. We have to teach and model for them patience and the ability to wait. We need to make sure that they know the difference between their space and your space, the difference between their stuff and your stuff. They have difficulty relating to others, so for boys, we want to encourage them to have friends in addition to girlfriends. We have to look at medication if it becomes a huge problem, their relational skills, that is. You may want to consider coaching his team. Always look for teachable moments with the ADHD kid. Take advantage of those moments. Provide tips on relating to friends. You can even invite his friends on outings. And again, we're going to look at all of this in much more detail in the ebook.